Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Shut up. Om. Om. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome to you all. Good. Nice to see you. Last week we couldn't meet. It was snowing. Last week it was snowing. Today it's in the 60s. This weather is interesting. And you know that when we cancel a class, we always send out an email on our program announcement list, so you can sign up for those emails on our website. We begin today our study of Chapter 8. One odd thing about Chapter 8 is that it has a variety of names. Most chapters have one or sometimes two names that stick quite well. Chapter 8 seems to have quite a range of names. Bear in mind that these names are not part of the scripture. These names are not even found in the Mahabharata, the scripture from which the Bhagavad Gita is drawn. These names are added by later generations of scholars. They're meaningful, but they're not always fixed in concrete, as they say. The most common name, I think, for Chapter 8 is Akshara Brahma Yoga. Akshara Brahma is a term that Sri Krishna himself uses, so we'll see that. Akshara, imperishable, the imperishable Brahman, and we'll see that in the text itself. We'll begin with some recitation, first few verses. As always, read the translation and then repeat after me. Arjuna Vacha. Vacha. Let me get that. There we go. Kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam, kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam, kim karma purushottama, kim karma purushottama, adhibhutam cha kim proktam, adhibhutam cha kim proktam, adhidaivam kim uchyate, adhidaivam kim uchyate, adhiyajñah katam kotra, adhiyajñam katam kotra, dehesmin madhusudana, dehesmin madhusudana, prayana kale chakatam, prayana kale chakatam, nyeyosi niyatatmavihi, Nyeyosi niyatatmabihi. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Aksharam Brahma Paramam, Aksharam Brahma Paramam. Swabhavo-dhyatma muchyate, Swabhavo-dhyatma muchyate, Bhuta-bhavo-dbhavakaro, Bhuta-bhavo-dbhavakaro, Visarga-karma-sanyataha, Visarga-karma-sanyataha, Adhibhutam ksharo bhavaha. Adhibhutam ksharo bhavaha. Purushashchadi daivatam. Purushashchadi daivatam. Adhiyagnoha me vatra. Adhiyagnoha me vatra. Dehe deha bratam vara. Dehe deha bratam vara. Antakale cha mam heva. Antakale cha mam heva. Smaran muktva kalevaram. Smaran muktva kalevaram. Yah prayati samadbhavam. Yah prayati samadbhavam. Yati nastyatra samshayaha. Yati nastyatra samshayaha. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam. Yan yan bhavam bhavam. Tyajatyante kalevaram. Tyajatyante kalevalam. Tam tamevaiti kaunteya. Tam tamevaiti kaunteya. Sadatad bhava bhavitaha. Sadatad bhavi bhavitaha. Good. Let us come back to the beginning of the chapter, which opens, obviously, with Arjuna's question. Arjuna's question is actually prompted by the last verse of the prior chapter, chapter 7. If you remember, Sri Krishna in his concluding remarks, as we can call them, Sri Krishna made reference to some terms that two terms that Arjuna hadn't heard before, sadhi bhutam and sadhi yajnam. The context is Sri Krishna is to be known sa adhibhutam, along with the world of elements, sa adhiyajnam, sadhiyajnam, in the context of rituals. So this is Sri Krishna's concluding comments. Arjuna had never heard these terms before, so that prompts him to ask a series of questions. Also, Sri Krishna says very significantly, he says, antakale, at the end of one's life, he says, I am to be known through meditation. I am to be known, Sri Krishna speaking in the first person, I am to be known at the end of life through meditation. That term antakale really caught. Actually, prayanakali, I think, is a term he used. Prayana means going. Anta means end. So either the antakala, the end time, or the prayanakala, the time of going, both refer to the time of death. And that question in particular caught Arjuna's attention. Based on that, he asks a series of 7 questions in the first 2 verses, in the opening verses of this chapter. We'll see them, and you'll notice that it's like a list of questions. And we'll see in a few moments how Sri Krishna responds to that list. So let's see the first of those 2 verses. Arjuna vacha, Arjuna vacha, kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam, kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam, kim karma purushottama, kim karma purushottama, adhibhutam cha kim proktam, adhibhutam cha kim proktam, adhidaivam kemuchyate, adhidaivam kemuchyate. So here we go, Arjuna's shopping list of questions. Kim tat brahma? Tat brahma, that which is Brahman. Kim, what is Brahman? Kim, and by the way, that wasn't referred to in a prior chapter, so Arjuna is using this as an opportunity. to give Sri Krishna his shopping list of questions. Kim adhyatmam. What is adhyatmam? Adhi, atma. Adhi usually means towards, with regard to. So what is adhyatmam? What is the self? What is atma? Next question, kim karma? Third question, what is karma? Where does that question come from? There's nothing to anticipate that question. What is karma? Purushottama, Purusha Uttama, the highest being, Sri Krishna. Adhibhutam chakim proktam. Finally, we get one of the words that Sri Krishna used at the end of chapter 7, adhibhutam. Adhi, with regard to bhuta, material, elements, matter. So, kim proktam, what is that which is called adhibhutam, matter? Adhidaivam, kim uchyate. And kim, what? Uchyate is that which is called adhidaivam. Daivam literally means that which is divine, that which is of the devas is daivam. Adhi, with regard to that. So what is that which is called divine? Here we have the first 5 of Arjuna's questions, and he's not done. His list continues. Adhyagnya katam kotra, adhyagnya katam kotra, dehesman madhusudana, dehesman madhusudana, prayana kale chakatam, prayana kale chakatam, nyeyo sidniyatatma bihi, nyeyo sidniyatatma bihi. Adhiyagnaha is one of the terms Sri Krishna used at the end of chapter 7. So Arjuna says, katam, how and kaha, who. Set katam aside for a moment. Kaha, who is adhiyagnaha? Adhi with regard to yagna. Yagna is ritual, especially the fire rituals in which offerings are made into a sacrificial fire. So kaha adhiyagnaha, who is that one with regard to rituals, dehe asmin, dwelling asmin, in this dehe, body, asmin dehe, dwelling in the body. So who is that one dwelling in the body at the time of the performance of rituals? And katam, how is that so? Madhusudana, the Sudana, the one who killed the demon Madhu as a child. When Krishna was young, he killed several demons, according to the stories. So that is the 6th of Arjuna's 7 questions. The 7th one comes in the second half. Prayana kale cha, and prayana kale, as I said before, kale, at the time of prayana, travel. And that's a very common term for death. What a nice metaphor. You know, when in American English, we use we use this polite language. Someone passes away, because we don't want to say. It sounds a little harsh to say someone died, so we say passes away. And that passes away is based on really Christian Judaic biblical culture. But here in this context, you wouldn't say passes away. You would say prayana kale, one who travels on. So instead of saying he passed away, you can say he traveled on. That's kind of the concept of that term. Prayana kale cha, and at the end of one's life, katam, how, nyeyaha asi. How are asi, you, O Krishna, how are you nyeyaha, to be known? How are you to be known at the end of one's life? Niyata atma bihi. It's a little tricky word, because here atma means mind, as we've seen in other places. One whose mind is niyata, controlled, specifically controlled in the performance of meditation. So niyatatma bihi in the context would mean by meditators. By those who meditate, how are you to be known at the time of death? And this question, you'll find, really dominates the chapter. Sri Krishna answers the first 6 questions in 2 verses. And he spends the rest of the chapter explaining the 7th question about what happens at the time of death. So, in summary, you can say that chapter 8 deals with this time of death, and in particular, a form of meditation that one can practice at the time of death. We'll see all of that in quite some detail. A last comment before we plunge into these questions. You might remember when we introduced chapter 7, we said that the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are focused on devotion. Chapters 7 through 12, devotion. Chapter 8 sort of sticks out. If you remove chapter 8, you'd have really a very simple flow from 7 to 9, 10, 11, 12. You can find a flow in that. So chapter 8 kind of sticks out as not in the flow of the topic. And of course, the reason is Arjuna's question. So Arjuna kind of interrupted I don't mean to accuse him of interrupting, but what he did is he put the discussion in a different direction for chapter 8, and then in chapter 9, Sri Krishna picks up the thread and returns to that topic. So remember, the middle 6th chapter deals with devotion, deals with who and what is Ishvara, the God of the cosmos. Chapter 8 sticks out from that pattern a little bit. Okay, enough. Let's proceed. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Aksharam Brahma Paramam, Aksharam Brahma Paramam, Swabhavodhyatma Muchyate, Swabhavodhyatma Muchyate, Bhuta Bhavodbhavakaro, Bhuta Bhavodbhavakaro, Visarga karma sanyataha, Visarga karma sanyataha. So he takes Arjuna's 7 questions in order. The first question, Kim Tad Brahma, what is Brahman, was Arjuna's question. Sri Krishna's answer is Brahman is that which is Aksharam and Param. He uses these 2 adjectives. Param you know as supreme, absolute. So the supreme or absolute reality, which is aksharam. Kshara is that which decays, that which undergoes change. And anything that undergoes change eventually decays. Our bodies are good examples of that. Our bodies are constantly undergoing change, and that's all part of a process of decay. So aksharam, literally undecayable, that doesn't sound like a very nice translation. Many times we'll go for a word like immutable, which means changeless, that's a nice word to refer to Brahman. Immutable. The immutable, supreme reality, ultimate reality, absolute reality, that's even a better word. The immutable, absolute reality because of which everything exists. That's our definition of Brahman. Brahman is a reality because of which everything exists. Here we have 2 adjectives, param and aksharam. Immutable really has a nice meaning because when you when you make the pot, clay itself undergoes no change. Immutable. When the pot is broken, nothing happens. The clay, immutable. So that's what that word akshara implies. So that which is unchanging, undecaying, immutable, like the clay with reference to the pot. So very brief, how about that? A definition of Brahman in 2 words, and that's all he has to say. So in fact, for each of Arjuna's questions, he's only going to use a handful of words. So clearly, Sri Krishna doesn't want to focus on these and each of these 6 questions. And since Sri Krishna doesn't want to focus on them, we're not going to either. We'll go through them quickly, as he does. But we'll focus on the final question, as Sri Krishna does. Second question Arjuna had was, Kim adhyatmam? Adhyatma, adhyatmam. Sri Krishna says, adhyatmam uchyate, in the second line. That which is called adhyatma is swabhava. What a nice definition. Swabhava is your true nature, your inner nature. Adhyatma, it simply means Atma. Satchidananda Atma is your swabhava, your true nature, as we've discussed at great length in these classes. Your true nature is Satchidananda Atma. That's exactly what Sri Krishna says. Adhyatma is swabhava, your true nature. Third question, look at the final line. Karma sanyataha. So Arjuna asked, Kim karma? What is karma? And Sri Krishna's response is, karma sanyataha, that which is called karma, that which is named karma, is the sarga. The sarga here means creation. Now that seems like a very unique definition of karma. Sri Krishna is referring to karma here as a creative force. And that's not normally how we define karma, but it's meaningful, and you'll see why. So karma is visargaha, a creative force. In what sense is it a creative force? In the third line, karma is bhuta, bhava, udbhava, karaha. Karma is that which does the udbhava kara, that which causes the arising of the bhava, of the existence of all bhutas, of all beings. Karma gives rise to the existence of all beings. What Sri Krishna is referring to here is the cycle of creation. You have to understand his definition, you have to understand the context in which he gives the definition. And his context is the cycle of creation. We understand that the world in which we live goes through cycles of manifestation and dissolution. Periods in which the universe is in a condition of being vyakta, manifest, and then in periods of time in which it is avyakta, unmanifest. So it is said then that the universe becomes manifest from the unmanifest like a tree becomes manifest from a seed. This is the typical explanation. The tree is present in the seed in an unmanifest form. And this is all based on a very fundamental element of philosophy, and that is something doesn't come from nothing. It's very basic reasoning. Something doesn't come from nothing. The universe could not have come from nothing. The universe had to come from a something. What was that something? That something was like a seed. And that seed is more specifically, excuse me, the universe in an unmanifest condition. And to understand how karma fits into it, here's the big picture. Right now, you and I and everyone who lives, we have lots of karma, and that karma is being exhausted. And according to the laws of the universe, in order for our karmas to be exhausted, remember, karmas to be exhausted means deeds have been committed, the results have not yet taken place, and the law of cause-effect wants to make sure that every action has an effect. So according to that very basic principle of karma, law of cause and effect, all of these actions which have been performed in the past must eventually yield their results. And in order for them to yield their results, the universe has to continue existing. If there's no universe, how can our karmas be exhausted? So the world continues. This is a perspective from the doctrine of karma. The world continues to exist so that all karmas can be exhausted. Now, imagine a time, someplace in the future, where every living being has only a little bit of karma left. I know it sounds a little bit far, it's a stretch of imagination, but this will help you understand the cycle of creation. Imagine, statistically, anything is possible, right? So statistically speaking, at some point in the future, there will be a time when every living being has just a tiny bit of karmas remaining to be exhausted, and when every last karma has been exhausted, there's no need for the universe to continue existing. You could say that the collective karma, because of which the universe exists, has come to an end. In fact, Puja Swami Tadatmananda, my guru, would often refer to collective karma. He would say that a family has a collective karma. A society, a country, has a collective karma. And the collective karma affects not individuals. The collective karmas affect the whole. So imagine now a collective karma for all beings that exist. And imagine that collective karma being exhausted. With the exhaustion of the collective karma, the force that causes the universe to continue to exist. Remember, I said, universe exists for the sake of exhausting karma, from the standpoint of karma. So that force comes to an end, and when all karmas are exhausted, the universe goes into a state of dissolution. The universe becomes unmanifest and enters this, we call it bija avastha. The avastha, the state of being like a bija, like a seed. Okay, next question, of course, then how does the universe become manifest again? You might remember this way back in chapter 2, I think we had a detailed discussion of the doctrine of karma. Do you remember a distinction we make between prarabdha karma and sanchita karma? Prarabdha karmas are the karmas you're born with. Right now, we are all born due to prarabdha karmas, and those karmas are being exhausted. When our individual prarabdha karmas are exhausted, we die. And at the scenario I described, which is statistically possible, wherein every living being has only a little bit of prarabdha karma left, and when all of those prarabdha karmas are exhausted, then the universe enters a state of dissolution. It becomes unmanifest. But you might remember, in addition to prarabdha karma, there's such a thing as sanchita karma. Sanchita karma are the karmas accumulated from infinite number of prior lives. You can easily exhaust prarabdha karmas. We'll all easily exhaust our prarabdha karmas within 100 years. I think that's safe to say. Within 100 years, we're all guaranteed, pretty much, to exhaust our prarabdha karmas. Sanchita karma is something else entirely. It's the karmas accumulated over an infinite number of prior lives. You can't exhaust those karmas in 100 years. In fact, you can't exhaust those karmas in an infinite number of years because they're infinite in number. So those sanchita karmas remain when the universe is in an unmanifest condition. I'm being a little bit detailed here because sometimes people have questions about how does this universe come and go, and this is what Sri Krishna says very briefly. I'm giving you the more elaborate form of this. So imagine now the universe has become in a resolved condition, avyakta, unmanifest, but all the beings exist just as the universe exists in a seed form. All beings also exist in a seed form, means sukshma sharira exists without a sthula sharira, and the sanchita karmas are associated with that sukshma sharira, the individual beings in an unmanifest condition. Unmanifest condition means the condition after your death and before you get reborn. That's the unmanifest condition for a being, a living being. So, not only is the universe in an unmanifest condition, countless beings are in an unmanifest condition. Those countless beings all have sanchita karma. Sanchita karma also needs to be fructified. So the laws of nature, the laws of karma, specifically the law of cause and effect, wants to ensure that those sanchita karmas also gets fructified. You remember from our discussion of the doctrine of karma that a portion of sanchita karma becomes your prarabdha karma. The karmas that determine a given lifetime, prarabdha karmas, are a portion of that sanchita karma. So now imagine all the beings in an unmanifest condition with their sanchita karmas. From their sanchita karmas, a portion becomes prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma are karmas that have to be exhausted in a lifetime. But as we said at the outset, in order to exhaust karmas in a lifetime, the universe has to exist. And here's the bottom line. I apologize. I'm being quite detailed about this, but I think you'll get it very clearly. The outcome of this whole discussion is this: to exhaust all of that sanchita karma, the universe is driven to become manifest again. So karma causes the universe to become manifest again, to go from the unmanifest condition to the manifest condition for the sake of exhausting karma. In that context, Sri Krishna calls karma visargaha, a creative force, a creative capacity. So now you can understand it's a rather unique perspective. It's not the most common way of defining karma, of explaining karma, but it's what Sri Krishna chose to focus on in his brief explanation to Arjuna. So Arjuna asked, what is karma? And Sri Krishna's response, he responded briefly. I can't be as brief as Sri Krishna. So his very brief response is, karma is that creative force which causes the unmanifest universe to become manifest once again. Okay, then. We have three questions are done. Next three questions come in the next verse. Adhibhutam ksharo bhavaha, adhibhutam ksharo bhavaha, purushashchadi daivatam, purushashchadi daivatam, adhiyagnohame vatra, adhiyagnohame vatra, dehe dehabhratam vara, dehe dehabhratam vara. So one of Arjuna's questions was, what is adhibhutam? And that was a question about a term used at the end of chapter 7. And remember, adhibhutam with regard to bhuta beings or elements. So Sri Krishna says here very briefly, adhibhutam, matter, is ksharaha bhavaha. It is a bhava, an existence that is kshara. Now his choice of the word kshara is interesting because in a prior verse, Sri Krishna used the word akshara, immutable, undecaying. Now he's using the word kshara, that which is mutable, that which is subject to transformation, that which is subject to decay. So he's contrasting Brahman, which is immutable, with matter, which is mutable, which is decaying. So adhibhutam, the world of stuff, as we say, is ksharaha bhavaha. It's an existence that is kshara, that is subject to decay. The next of Arjuna's questions was adhidaivam, daivam, divine. Adhidaivam, what is that which exists as divinity? Sri Krishna gives a one-word answer, Purushaha, and Purusha can have so many meanings. I've defined it here as cosmic being, which is a common, in fact, in chapter 15, Purusha will mean cosmic being. I checked the commentary, Madhusudana Saraswati's commentary, and he actually says that Purusha, according to Madhusudana, is Hiranyagarbha. Now, what in the world is Hiranyagarbha? Hiranyagarbha is Ishvara from a particular standpoint, from the standpoint of the entire subtle universe. The sukshma bhuta, the subtle elements, the subtle beings, the sukshma shariras, the subtle bodies that enliven our physical bodies, the sum total of the sukshma jagat, the subtle world, the sum total of that which is sukshma, subtle, is Hiranyagarbha. So Ishvara, who possesses or rules over the entire subtle universe. It has this fancy name, Hiranyagarbha, and that's what Madhusudana Saraswati refers to here as Purusha. Either way, it's a very brief and, what is the word, inscrutable answer? Because you give a one-word answer and it doesn't really explain much. But that apparently, as I said before, that apparently is Sri Krishna's intention. It is not Sri Krishna's intention to get into a long explanation for these first 6 questions, so he glosses over them, as we say. And you'll see that also with the 6th of Arjuna's questions. Sri Krishna goes very briefly. So that question was adhiyagnya, the one connected to ritual. So who is that one connected to ritual? The one who is breaking the words apart. Aham eva atra dehe. Atra, there, here, dehe, in the body. The one who is in the body, engaged in the performance of rituals, Sri Krishna kind of unexpectedly says, Aham eva. I indeed am the one in the body engaged in rituals. And here Sri Krishna refers to himself, we saw this quite a bit in chapter 7, Sri Krishna referring to himself as the inborn divinity, the inner divinity, the true self, Satchidananda Atma. So here Sri Krishna refers to himself as the inner self, the inner divinity. Aham eva, I indeed am dehe, in the body, adhiyagnaha, engaged in the performance of rituals. And Sri Krishna concludes here, addressing Arjuna as Deha Bhritam Vara. Vara, the best. O Arjuna, you are Vara, the best of Deha Bhrit, those who have bodies. Literally, you are the best of those who bear a body. You are a great one, O Arjuna. So notice how quickly Sri Krishna disposed of these first 6 questions, perhaps because Sri Krishna wanted to focus on the 7th question. And as I said before, the 7th question now becomes the subject matter for the remainder of the chapter. So let's get started with that. Antakale cha mam heva, antakale cha mam heva, smaran muktva kalevaram, smaran muktva kalevaram, yah prayati samadbhavam, yad prayati samadbhavam, yati nastyatra samshayaha, yati natyatra samshayaha. Good. So Arjuna had asked, antakale, prayanakale, he had used the term, at the time of travel, at the time of death, how are you to be known, O Krishna? Was Arjuna's question. And Sri Krishna's response here is antakale, at the last time, at the time of death. Second line, muktva kalevaram. Muktva, giving up. Kalevaram is a word used sometimes for body. Giving up your body, antakale, at the time of death. Then, how am I, the question was, how is Sri Krishna to be known? Sri Krishna says here, mam eva smaran. Smaran literally means remembering. Mam eva smaran, remembering me alone. Now, as we go forth in this chapter, you'll find there's a lot of discussion of meditation. So smaran here means more than remembering. It suggests meditating. So smaran, mam eva, remembering me at the time of death, or meditating on me at the time of death. We'll have a long discussion about that. He says, yaha prayati, in the third line, one who travels on at the end of one's life, giving up the body, remembering me, meditating on me. What about that person? Saha, that person, madbhavam yati. That person, yati, reaches. Madbhavam, my state, my existence, that person reaches me. And we're going to discuss this at some length, so I'm not going to dwell on it right here. That person who, at the end of one's life, is remembering Ishvara, is meditating on Ishvara, that person reaches Ishvara. Shri Krishna says that person reaches me at the end of life. Na asti atra samshayaha. Na asti, there is not, atra, with regard to this, there is not any samshaya, there is no doubt. There is no doubt in this matter that one who meditates on me at the end of their life will definitely reach me. And instead of my explaining, I'll let Sri Krishna explain in the very next verse. Let's see how he explains. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam, tyajatyante kalevaram, tyajatyante kalevaram, tam tam evaiti kaunteya, tam tam evaiti kaunteya, sada tad bhava bhavitaha, sada tad bhava bhavitaha. Start in the second line. Ante, you have to break the words apart. Tyajati, ante. Ante, at the end of one's life. Tyajati, one who gives up, giving up what? There's our word again, kalevaram, giving up the body. Ante, at the end of one's life, giving up the body. First line, smaran, and meditating on bhavam, on something, an object of meditation. Now, Sri Krishna is going to explain here, yam yam va api bhavam. Whatever state, whatever you smaran here, literally remembering, but as I suggested, meditating upon, whatever you remember at the end of your life, whatever you meditate upon at the end of your life, drop down to the third line, tam tam eva eti, breaking the words apart, tam eva eti, tam tam eva eti, that indeed you reach, eti, you reach, you go to put that together for you, what at the end of your life, when you give up your body, whatever you meditate upon, whatever you remember, whatever you meditate upon, that you reach. Kaunteya, O son of Kunti Arjuna, you reach that at the end of your life. Why and how, he explains in the final quarter here. Sada, always, tad bhava bhavitaha. Always bhavitaha suggests a state of meditative absorption, more than memory. Bhavitaha, being absorbed in tad bhava, that state, that existence. Whatever you remember or meditate upon at the end of your life, you reach that with the condition that you are always absorbed in that state. And sada, always absorbed in that state. We're going to have to talk about this verse a little bit because it's often quoted out of context and turned into something silly. And I do mean silly. If you take a very simplistic interpretation of this verse, whatever is your last, and people believe this, whatever is your last thought just before you die, that very last thought will determine what happens in your next life. This is simplistic, this is silly, and this is not what Sri Krishna means here at all. So let's understand this. First of all, at the end of our lives, how much control do you think we'll have over our minds at that point in time? And, many people, and by the way, one really good thing about healthcare, especially in this country, is when people who die, it can be very fearful, very difficult for people. So it's very common to administer morphine to a dying person so they can be at peace, so they can be relaxed, so they aren't so fearful. I understand that this isn't done everywhere. I'm told it's not done much in India. I'm not sure if that's correct. And if that's so, I think it's unfortunate because this is just to allow us to die in peace. If a little morphine helps and removes fear, in my opinion, that's a really wonderful thing. The hospice programs in this country do that regularly, and I think it's a very good thing. But here's a point. So if you are administered morphine so that you won't be so tense and fearful at the end of your life, that morphine is going to make your mind dull. So it's absolutely going to affect. By the way, I would much rather have a morphine-dulled mind than a mind that was stricken by fear or concerns, worries. Oh, what happens to everyone left behind? You can imagine that your last moments could be quite, I don't want to dwell on this topic, but you can imagine your last moments could be terrible. And who wants to die like that? So, if you're administered morphine, you won't have control. But actually, allow me to share with you this anecdote. I said before, we have so little control over our last moments, the nature of our mind at the last thought that we have, I sometimes imagine what would be my last thought. Suppose I was standing on the roadside. You remember this? Yeah, that's good. So suppose I was standing on a road and a huge truck was about to hit me. And so I would have just not even a second to have a last thought. What would be my last thought? Now, it depends on your culture. For Gandhiji, after he was shot several times, his last word was, Hey Ram. Beautiful. So he said, Hey Ram, out loud. He said, as he was falling to the ground, Hey Ram, because that was his culture in which he lived. I didn't grow up in Gujarat. I grew up in American culture, and I'm quite sure that if that truck were about to hit me, my last words would be, oh, shh, you know the word. I guarantee it. That would be my last thought. I'm sure of it, because that's the culture in which I've been raised. So if we take this simplistic approach to interpreting this verse, I suppose that means I would be reborn as a dung beetle. These beetles which collect dung. Because that was my last word, right? I'm just having fun with this to show how silly it is to have this simplistic interpretation of this verse. So don't be very simplistic. It's not exactly whatever happens to be your very last thought. That can't possibly be what Sri Krishna really means here. So let's go a little bit more deeply. What is the message here? And here we can understand that the condition of your mind at the end of your life is going to be a product of how you've lived your entire life. Is it not so? The condition of your life, the condition of your mind overall. I do understand you can have fear, your mind can be dulled due to morphine, but overall, the condition of your mind at the end of your life will depend on how you've lived your entire life. And isn't that what Sri Krishna is pointing to in the last line? He says, Sada, always, tadbhava bhavitaha, always being absorbed in that state. Sada, always. So he's referring to something that's more than just that instant, that moment of death. He's referring to something much larger. And I would suggest that he's referring here not merely to the moment of your death, but to how you live your whole life. How we live our lives, how we live each and every day counts. We take each day for granted. We wake up and we go on with our day after day after day after day. We take these days for granted. Maybe that's a problem. You've heard it said that you should live each day as if it were your last day. That's been said in many ways, in many contexts, and I think there's some profound truth in that statement. You should live each day as if it were your last day, because then you won't take the day for granted, and you will focus on making the day count. How do you make the day count? That day should be productive for your spiritual growth, and it should be productive in that you also help others in their lives. You should help reduce the suffering of others. You should be living a life of dharma. It should be a day in which you are committed to the performance of dharma. Too often we live our lives mechanically, get up in the morning and we go through our routine. Some of you might have a to-do list, check off everything on your to-do list, and then you go to bed. What a shame. You do that several tens of thousands of times and then you die. What happens? This is why that statement is made, to live each day as if it were your last. When I was younger, most certainly that was not my perspective. Let me share with you something a little personal, because I think it's appropriate and meaningful. When I turned 60, not that long ago, some major changes happened both in my life and in my thinking. In fact, not just at 60, but shortly after 60, I lost both parents and I lost my guru in a span of just a few years. And those losses were significant and led me for the first time to focus more on the shortness of the span of my remaining life. So up until that time, generally when we're young, I think most people are like this, we don't think about the shortness of our lives. At some point, for me it was around 60, but for most people, at some point in their lives, they start thinking, oh gosh, I'm this age, and there are only so many years left. And to me, that's not a morbid thought at all. It's a very positive, powerful, transformative thought. It was for me. Because what it did for me is it made me so much more. Already, I was, the way I live and my whole orientation, already I was a fairly attentive person, attentive to following Dharma, attentive to living a life of spiritual growth. But after that period where I lost both parents and my guru, that changed my thinking in such a way that I became so much more attentive to the value of each and every day, so that I cannot possibly take a day for granted. Every day is a precious gift, and my goal is to make the best use of that gift I've received. It's a gift from Ishvara. I receive that each and every day as a gift from Ishvara. And when you receive such a blessed gift from the God of the cosmos, you want to treasure that gift. And how do you treasure that gift? By making the best use of that day, treating it with reverence. And that really transformed my thinking very dramatically. So to consider the shortness of our lives, at least from my perspective, is not a morbid thought at all. It's a very positive thought, because it makes us appreciate the value of each day, so that we don't squander these days. We use them in the best way possible. So when Sri Krishna says antakale, at the end of one's life, how do we know that today isn't that day? We have no way of knowing. Will we wake up tomorrow morning? We have no idea. There's no guarantee. So, antakale means now. Don't wait. What a huge mistake it is. This is just another observation. What a huge mistake. This is a mistake I don't think I know. None of you have made this mistake, but plenty of people do. And that is, they hold off on spiritual pursuits. They say, oh, I'll do that later in my life. So when they're in their 20s and 30s, they're focusing on family and profession, so that's not the right time for spiritual pursuit. When they're in their 40s and 50s, they're focused on other things. This is not the time for spiritual pursuit. When they're in their 50s and 60s, they're focused on yet other things. This is not the time. And then then when it is time, then they're sadly to say, used up. The mind is gone, the body is gone. It's too late to dedicate yourself to spiritual life. You've known people who have made that mistake. They hold off on their spiritual pursuits, and they hold off, and then it's too late. Fortunately, none of you have made that mistake. You're all sitting here today, so you've all recognized the importance of spiritual growth. And we'll come back to a verse now. Spiritual growth when, antakale, at the end of your life, and the end of your life is now, each and every moment. Sri Krishna uses that word sada, always. So this is what he's pointing to, not a mechanical thing of making your mind focus on Sri Krishna at the or on any particular thing at the very last moment, but in a more focusing on the entire life. Having said that, there's a second way in which Sri Krishna is going to discuss that. In this verse and the next verse, you'll see him discuss the importance of focusing your mind on God, if I can use that term, by focusing your life on Dharma each and every moment of your life, so that when you reach the end of your life, you've lived that kind of life. But he's also, and there's a second aspect that he's going to discuss at some length in this chapter, and that is for certain yogis, for certain meditators, for certain people who have really dedicated their lives to cultivating a practice of meditation and a very powerfully controlled mind. For those people, Sri Krishna is going to prescribe a particular meditation practice that can be done at the end of one's life. So we're looking at two different aspects of this end of life discussion. One aspect is end of life means every moment. So every moment should be lived with attention to the value, with reverence for the gift of life. But then the second aspect Sri Krishna will discuss in a few more verses. He's going to talk about a particular meditation practice that can be engaged in at the end of life. Okay, let's just see the next verse, which then closes this particular idea. He says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, mamanusmara yudhyacha, mamanusmara yudhyacha, mayarpitamano buddhir, mayarpitamano buddhir, mame vaishyasya samshayaha, mame vaishyasya samshayaha. Tasmat, therefore, Arjuna, sarveshu kaleshu, at all times. Notice prior verse, antakale, end of life. Now he's switched to sarveshu kaleshu, at all times. Mam anusmara. Anusmara, think of me. Mam, me. Anusmara, think of me. Remember me. Meditate on me. Yudhyacha. And fight on the battlefield. What a wonderful message Sri Krishna is addressing Arjuna, who's about to fight this horrible 18-day war, and he's saying, while you're on the battlefield, engaged in war, don't forget me. Think of me, remember me, meditate on me, be focused on me while you're on the battlefield. Now, this is a powerful message is when you really consider these warriors on the battlefield. So Sri Krishna knows that war is a very demanding activity, but Sri Krishna insists that while you're engaged, even in mortal combat, it's possible to keep your mind focused on the higher goal. The higher goal is not merely defeating your enemy. The ultimate goal, in Sri Krishna's language, would be to reach me on the battlefield. And for warriors on a battlefield, this is a very significant message, because on a battlefield, you could die any moment, right? Think of our poor friends in Ukraine. Any moment, if they're living in some of the towns, in Kiev and in that Mariupol, any moment a bomb, a missile could fall from the sky, and in that moment your life would come to an end. And you don't know when that moment would come. What a horrible, horrible situation. Well, warriors on a battlefield deal with that same uncertainty. You have no idea when life will come to an end. In that condition, Sri Krishna says, Ma manusmara. Not knowing when your life will come to an end, mam anusmara. Think of me continually. And actually, we'll come back to this verse in the next class, so let me make some final comments here. The battlefield is not, you've heard me give this metaphor before, and that metaphor is that battlefield is not just Mahabharata, battlefield is our lives, the battlefield of life. And life resembles a battlefield in many ways. You have struggles in life. You have enemies, sadly, in life. And just as on the battlefield you could die any moment, in life, we could die any moment. So it's not unlike a battlefield. We struggle and we are subject to death. In the midst of that struggle, in the midst of that uncertainty, Sri Krishna says, Mam anusmara. Now, the last message here is this. When you're in the midst of battle, it's too late to cultivate a mind that is predisposed to dwell on higher things. To prepare yourself for the battlefield of life, to prepare yourself for battle, the preparation is crucial. The preparation is done not on the battlefield. The preparation is done at the time of sadhana. The preparation is done at times like now, when we're having a class. Preparation is done if you have some prayer, some meditation, some puja that you might do each day. Those are the times in which we prepare ourselves. We prepare ourselves by molding our minds in such a way where our minds are naturally inclined to seek a higher perspective. That's a very simple but accurate way of describing spiritual life. So instead of immersing ourselves, instead of immersing our minds in the minutiae of life, the details, the trivia of life, the sadhana we do, the classes we attend, meditation, prayer, any kind of spiritual religious activities, all of this contributes to elevating our minds. And not just elevating our minds at the time of practice. You've all observed how attending classes like these regularly changes the way you think, not surprisingly. So the goal then is not to merely elevate your mind at the time of class or at the time of spiritual practice, but to lift your mind up and keep it out of the dirt, so to speak, out of the trivia, the minutiae of lives, but to keep our minds elevated and focused on the bigger goals of life, spiritual growth in particular. That's what we're engaged in, and that's what Sri Krishna is talking about. I think there's more to discuss here, so why don't we conclude our class at this point. We'll come back to this verse in our next class. A brief announcement. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have satsang, question-answer session at 6 p.m. So join us tomorrow at 6 for satsang. We'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganpatigam Havamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shranvan Utabasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.